fascinating because as you're talking about the advancement of the technology to support that kind of learning, I'm reminded of when I very first got started in instructional design after being a teacher, and we had to limit the amount of images we would place in a course because they took so long to load, right? And now we're at the point where we can have synchronous conversations. We can work in small groups. That didn't exist back when I was first designing online programs. We actually had to use conference call lines in order to do that.
Right. And to give you an example, what we had to build in order to make our platform really work for this sort of thing is, as a teacher, I'd ask a question if I had a clicker or no clicker, and people were doing like surveys or polls, and I would then say, okay, so everyone answered A, go to that part of the room. Everyone answered B, go to that part. You have to build. So that's one of the things that we took months to build into our platform when we first started. We can build automatically breakout rooms based on how people respond to questions. So that's just something that if you're the ABA or if you're a teacher, you have to say, well, it has to be able to do that or else I can't do what I normally do, right? And so you used to have these clickers and you'd see all that, the solution would be, 50 people in A and 20 people in B and all these other things. You have to be able to do that on the fly, no slowdown, no nothing. That has to be built into the platform from the core, from the beginning. And that's what people are trying to do. Whether you can bolt that onto Zoom and still make it as slick as Zoom normally is, I don't know. Whether you have to build it from scratch the way that other competitors to us, although we're not really in the platform business, but Engagely or Class for Zoom or Top Hat or name the company. That's still to be determined. But I think the ABA will be increasingly open-minded as those issues are being addressed. So look, I went through a accreditation where they were really questioning the library. So you need 200,000 volumes in your library. Well, that's ridiculous because all those books are now online. So all you really need is to have a subscription. The ABA adapted to that. They're like, okay, so you have a subscription to this library. You don't need all those brown books lined up in a shelf 1 to 600 and looking all pretty in the background. It's just not necessary anymore. So limiting factor, you don't need to limit anymore. I think now that the limits are off online education in terms of the ability to really communicate, I think that will change as well.
You just described some significant intentional design when you've got the ability to sort and move your students around based on how they respond to a question. So I love that. I also wanted to ask you just real quickly about equity when we start thinking about the design of online programs, because what we're seeing just with the program we worked on with Emory's Law School, the population that's flocking to the online program is actually primarily women and women of color. And so I think we've seen this across programs for many years, that it is providing access to individuals who wouldn't have been able to get to campus otherwise. But I wonder if you're also anticipating or expecting to see more equity across the output of the JD programs as they become more and more prevalent in the online space.
I think that's a huge part. So my experience, my whole background is in civil rights law and equity, and trying to understand how you make the promise of America, speaking specifically about my expertise, available to as many people as possible without racism or sexism or any form of discrimination. I taught anti-discrimination law. It's what I hope I do, at least with part of my energy every day. So I think online education, making it available to people around the world, making it to people who normally wouldn't see themselves as saying, okay, well, I can't spend 3 years and a ton of money on a JD. If it's less money and it's more accessible and I can still do all the other things I would do, whether it's work full-time, work part-time, have a family or not, just leaving those doors open for as many people as possible. I think online access is a huge part of that is equity. So absolutely, I think that's a key element of things. There are schools and traditionally have not drawn particularly widely from non-white, non-male populations that will start to see that increase. And I think that will also be, to take it to an earlier part of the conversation, yes, you have equity to someone who's going to get like a master's degree or some other part of a legal education online. make it stackable, right? Make it so that those courses that you can take could then be, brought into the first year of a JD. So I like doing this. I use that credential to get a better job. I made the better money for a while. Now I'm in a position where I can go to school more full time, maybe more in person, maybe hybrid, step back on or step onto that JD track, and be able to build up from there. I think that's a huge part of where the student mindset is now. So if you can increase equity through better access, but you can also give people the sense that they can do this in chunks, and that they can get that first year, or they can get part of that first year. It changes your mindset. It's not 3 years anymore. Even if it's 2.5 years, even if it's 2.25 years, that's just easier to think about. So I think those two things, seeing education as being built in chunks and opening the equity and the access, I think those are two huge parts of how this is all going to change. I think lots of law schools are going to recognize this. Most law professors are there, at least in part, because of this desire to increase justice and fairness and equity. I wouldn't say all of them, but it's true of almost all the law professors I can think of off the top of my head. That's part of what they want. So if they're resistant to change when it comes to education, if part of the argument that the associate dean, speaking as a former associate dean, is pushing to say, we should do this new thing, they're like, no, we're not going to change. Change is bad. If part of the argument is we're going to make this more equitable, more accessible to the kinds of people that haven't been here before, I think, because again, the faculties at these schools are almost all tenured, they're quite powerful. If they're in the sort of change is bad camp, showing them that equity increases by looking at places like Emory that can demonstrate this, more access, more equity, more diverse students, from people who are first generation college, people who are lower income, people who are people of color, all those things, people who are immigrants, all those elements. If you can show that, that's a key part of just getting that 67th out of the 100th law professor in the 2/3 majority to create a new program. So I think that's a key part of the persuasion element that, again, you and I know we can build a great program. If the faculty aren't supportive of it, they can stop it from happening, in most schools. So you need to also figure out how to persuade them that, in this case, change is good.
An excellent point and a great place for us to wrap up. Thank you so much, Akiba. I truly enjoy every conversation, always educational, and I look forward to next time.
Thank you, Whitney. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I learn, again, more from you than I know you learn from me, and it always has been the case from the first time we met in Dallas 10 years ago, I think it was. Maybe 9 years ago. I can't remember. But thank you. And I know that iDesign does incredible work for fantastic customers. And I think there are a lot of OPMs out there that that promise scale and revenue, and that's the core of the value proposition. What I know about iDesign, based on everything I've seen in all your programs, is that the learning comes first, and then the scale and the revenue and all that. But I think that makes a huge difference. I think in an environment where the key is still learning, you guys are truly differentiated in the marketplace. So happy to be part of any conversation that you guys have.